All right. Good afternoon or good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are excited to talk about how we can use reflection as not just a tool for change in our organization or our programs, but also as a technique that we can use to support program improvement. So, before we get started, we'll go ahead and play a disclaimer.
This resource was developed in 2024 by the Nita M. Lowy 21st Century Community Learning Center's 21st CCLCE National Technical Assistance Center, NTAC, funded under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education Department and administered by Synergy Enterprises Incorporated under Cooperative Agreement Number 287E230009 with the Department's Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. Opinions expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the position or policy of the department, nor does mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply endorsement by the department or the federal government. This resource is in the public domain and is available at 21stcclcntech.org. Authorization to reproduce it in whole or in part is granted.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Shanika's welcome, and thank you for taking the time for our conversation today. The 21st CCLC NTAC really is here to help professionals like all of you obtain the knowledge and skills that you need to implement high-quality programming and improve your performance through best practices, evidence-based resources, and professional learning opportunities just like this session today. Our work focuses around a series of priorities, including addressing the impacts of COVID-19, providing equity of access to resources, supporting students' SEL needs. We have academic focus areas that you can see listed on your screen, as well as support for statutory and programmatic requirements and fiscal compliance. And we believe that unlocking reflection is one important way to do this building capacity work to improve the quality of our programs. So my name is Hillary Jones. I am one of the senior TA liaisons with the 21st CCLC NTAC. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today and to be able to have this conversation and talk a little bit about the importance of reflection and how it can support quality improvement of 21st CCLC programs across our nation. With me today is Shanika, and I will pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Hillary. So my name is Shanika Peck. I am also one of the senior TA liaisons for the 21st CCLC NTAC team. And I'm really excited about today's conversation because reflection is something that we often promote to do within our programs, but sometimes we fall short on our end to implement reflection for ourselves. So today we are going to cover different techniques that you can implement to not just support your own reflection, but also support the reflection of your subgrantees or even your support team in terms of who's supporting the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. So today, we are going to take some time to understand and apply 3 tactics for reflection. We'll also spend some time focusing on how we can support staff and subgrantees in learning and applying these tactics for reflection. Now, before we get into the juicy stuff around reflection, let's go ahead and start out with an activity here. So on your screen, you see a list of items. And what we would like for you all to do is just sort them into groups or categories. I want you to think about, well, what could these categories be, right? So again, take a look at the different items that you see on your screen. How would you sort them into groups or categories? And we'll just take a few moments. Now, if you'd like to share with us how you would like to sort them, feel free to do so in the chat. But we're curious, how would you sort these items?
Shanika, we've got a proteins, vegetables, and fruit sorter. Somebody volunteered that as an answer. Me personally, I want to sort them into prepared meals versus items to cook. So there's a couple options even there.
Okay, we have ingredients. I think I would probably separate them based on food groups. See a
Yeah,
couple there.
it's an easy one. I also got a healthy versus not as healthy response. So you can pick that healthy food, those apples, those eggs, versus maybe the hamburger and potato chips. We all need a little junk food in our life, right?
I mean, you can't go wrong with a good hamburger, though, honestly. We can make that healthy, right? So as we're thinking about how we would sort these items, I also want you to think about, are there any right solutions to how we can sort these things, right? We've heard a couple of different ideas. What would make our ideas similar to others, right? Now, I also want you to think about how we are sorting things in our life, right? How are we making it a habit of learning about these uh, different ways that we can come to different solutions, right? We also want you all to think about what's working, not what works for us isn't the same thing that would work for others, right? So this is the approach that we would like to take when it comes to reflection, right? We would like to take a step back and think about it, right? Spend a few minutes each day just reflecting on our own experiences and what we view as a possible solution versus the solution that may be populated by others. And so, what we'll do is we'll start with initiating reflection, right? This is called a reflective practice, right? So, reflective practice occurs when we just take a step back after an event or an action or an incident that has recently occurred. And we just take some moments to kind of figure out how we can start the reflection process. And this is usually one of the most difficult things to do when we start thinking about reflection, right? So, one thing that you can think about in terms of how we initiate reflection is to schedule it, right? How are we going to schedule reflection? How are we going to build the time within our busy day to provide a couple of minutes for us to reflect on what is happening? Now, this is one of the most important steps, right? We know that we are busy, we have a long list of things, we have deadlines, we have programs to visit. But really taking the time to reflect can be very meaningful and an impactful tool for program improvement. Now, another thing that we would like to look at in terms of how we initiate reflection is paying attention to emotions, right? So, when we feel strong emotions in the workplace, that can also be an indicator that we just need to begin that reflection process. So, these emotions can be many things, right? Maybe you see a staff member walking towards you with their notebook, ready to sit down with you, right? Depending on your experience with that staff member, you may roll your eyes, you may say to yourself, oh, brother, right? Those are some emotions that you may have that you need to pay attention to. Or maybe you are asking yourself, right? There's always the same thing that constantly occurs at the same time during the day, or maybe the same time throughout the year. Why is this thing always happening, right? Why is it that I have a sub grantee who never submits their data on time, right? It's a habit that you feel like should be addressed, but maybe you just don't have enough time to schedule that within your busy day, right? So that's another thing that we want to think about in terms of initiating reflection. And then, of course, and I kind of touched on this, right? Those recurring issues and challenges, right? So if you have these emotions tied to your staff member or a sub grantee, or maybe there's a partner within your organization, or you're experiencing challenges with these programs, you really take the time to identify why this is happening. And then that will go ahead and trigger your next response in terms of how we begin this reflection process, right? So let's talk about reflecting in the moment. So what we'll do is we'll take about 2 minutes to initiate our own reflections today. I want you to think about your own programs, right? What's happening in your state. You may be thinking about your stakeholders, maybe your staff who's supporting 21st CTLC programs. Right? I want you to take some time, let's take about 2 minutes And let's just jot down a few things that you would identify as a challenge or an issue. Now, you definitely don't have to explain to us what those issues are, right? Just keep this list to yourself. And again, you're just jotting down maybe a phrase, maybe a sentence that kind of helps you to identify what these reoccurring incidents may be. So again, we'll give you about 2 minutes to just jot down your thoughts. Right. And again, we're thinking about these reoccurring challenges or issues you may be facing. It's July. Some of you may have some new programs ready to start in August. Maybe some of you have some programs who are wrapping up with their summer enrichment, right? You probably experienced a number of issues throughout the year. We're thinking about a couple of challenges that may impact the future of a couple of programs, right? Just go ahead and jot that down. You may have some programs who, hey, decide, you know what, next year we are not able to operate, right? So I want you to just think about some of those challenges. And again, you're not sharing it with us, you're just keeping this list. And I want you to take a look at your list and think about the ways that you have tried to fix these issues, right? If you're thinking about how you were trying to fix these issues, how did you address them, or what kind of solutions were you planning for? Did these solutions work? Were you thinking about ways you can support coaching your staff or coaching your programs, right? Were you thinking about staff training on that specific issue? Maybe you're thinking about, maybe I can, uh, or maybe you had some plans around addressing those issues in a regional training for a number of programs, right? I really want you to just think about your list and look at those challenges, right? And think about what uh, things you were planning or you have tried to implement to fix those issues. Right. So, sorry, Hillary, it looks like you're going to
I
say
was going to
something.
say, so Shanika, I'm going to share a story from when I was a program director because it gives space for people to think about some of these, like what answering these questions might sound like. And so I had a site coordinator on my team who I really wasn't getting what I wanted to from this person. They had been frontline staff, they'd been phenomenal in their role. The kids loved them. And when we had a site coordinator position open up, we promoted them because we thought, what a great opportunity to bring up staff from within who are from the community. And when this person stepped into this role, they just really, really struggled. And my answer to have you tried to fix these issues before is yes, I tried to fix that issue, that challenge. I sent her to a lot of training, so many training sessions, virtual training, in-person training. My solution didn't work. She knew the information from the training. Like you could ask her a question about the information from the training, but she wasn't able to apply the information from the trainings to our program, to the real life context. She was provided coaching. We had a coach who worked on our team and who came and provided coaching and was like, she doesn't get it. How do we make it so that she can make this progress and apply the learning that she's doing to the context we're in? And so for me, I got to a point where I was really frustrated. I was like, what are we doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? Why is this such an issue ongoing that we can't build the skills in this person so that she can be a successful member of our team? And honestly, that asking that question ended up being beneficial for me because it helped me think about creative solutions. that helped address the different challenges that were being faced. And one of the things that she needed to see was that she needed to see the things modeled that we were talking about. She couldn't take the training or the coaching that we were talking about, what we were going to do, and then apply it in context. But once you showed her how to do it, she could follow that model. And so it helped her become more successful over time as we modeled some of those things. And so the even asking those questions, recognizing my frustration at the point of I've invested all this time, energy, money, and training and coaching and these different things, and it's still an issue, was valuable for me. So hopefully that's helpful for some of our audience as they think about what it might look like to identify those high emotions, those reoccurring challenges with an individual, but that can also apply across the board. Sometimes as program leaders, we have issues that are happening with many of our sites or most of our sites. And that's that same context of reoccurring challenges where we know that we need to address it. Somebody
Wow.
mentioned in the chat the same kind of thing with staffing and budgeting. And it's an ongoing, it's a cyclical process. And man, was time to put that budget together. Sometimes those feelings are hard, right? You're thinking about, for me, I was always thinking about individuals in seats and whether I could give that person who I thought deserved a raise, whether I could keep that person or I had to cut a position, or whether I could hire more staff so I could have more kids or add an aspect to the program that I thought would be beneficial. And man, there's real emotions connected to those decisions because there's real people behind those budgeting decisions. It's not just numbers on
Mhm.
a page.
Oh, absolutely. Hillary, thank you so much for sharing your experience and giving that example. Because it sounds like, through reflection, our own reflection, we're learning about different ways we can help our staff and our programs grow, but also how we can grow as leaders, right? That's really important. And so that actually brings us to our next point here, right? So we definitely want reflection to bring some form of learning, but the best way to do that is by starting with identifying a space for reflection so that you're able to identify what needs growth through your observations or through the observations of others, right? So when we think about reflection and how it'll bring learning, we want to think about a number of things that could possibly happen, right? And that starts, we can start off with the unawareness of behavior and response, right? When we become aware of our own behavior and the other's response to it, that will also inform how we reflect or how we process what we are experiencing. And then eventually that'll impact the solutions that we may come up together, right? We're also thinking about the gap between beliefs and actions. Now, this is something that I always see at a number of programs, right? So when we identify the gap between what we believe and what we actually do, that can also impact how we are supporting the growth of our team and our programs and also the growth of ourselves, right? So if we say that we are empowering staff, but we are the ones that's doing all the work, we're doing everything for them, and then we get frustrated, we become overwhelmed because we perceive them as not doing their jobs. But in reality, we're doing all the lifting for them, right? Is that really empowerment for our staff, right? We really have to think about how we are aligning our beliefs with our actions. Another thing that we have to look at is bias, right? When we observe a bias in what information that we believe is relevant, that also impacts how we learn from our reflection, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about how we can interpret information and process this during our reflection. Another thing that we have to think about is response based on similarities, right? So when we look for similarities in situations and respond based on these instead of its differences, that can also impact how we learn from our reflection, right? So let's keep these things in mind. And what we'll do is we'll take some time to listen to a scenario, and we'll actually have Hillary share a scenario. Hillary's great with these scenarios. And what we would like for you to do is just jot down a few things that you think reflection might help you become aware of within this scenario, right? So you may identify one of those four things that I briefly discussed in the last slide. It's also here on the screen in that blue circle. But Hillary's going to go ahead and read the scenario, and I want you to think about one, or maybe it's a couple of these things that you will need to pay attention to or become aware of as you reflect. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Hillary.
I went to visit a program yesterday. I met with the program director first, and they talked about their STEM programming, a key aspect of their program design, and how much their students were learning as a result. When I observed the activities, students chose between building a bridge from blocks, designing something on their tablets, or and those things could be printed on a 3D printer, or using the Spheros. Students were having fun and they really loved coming to the program, right? One even said, I love coming here. Yet I didn't really see any indication of the students being prompted to apply STEAM skills through the project. At the end of the visit, the project director and I chatted more, and they mentioned how important it is that students love coming to the program and that they don't want to push them too hard during after school.
All right, I hope you all got a chance to hear that scenario. Now let's think about what stood out the most to us. And you can feel free to share your responses in the chat. We'll keep a lookout in the chat to see your responses. But again, we're thinking about that program visit. One thing that stood out to me just right away, I think there is some bias here, Hillary, and please feel free to chime in, right? I think there are different perspectives on how students are engaged in this particular activity, right? In the scenarios that students were having fun. One student even commented, I love coming here, but there's something else that is being observed during this interaction that doesn't always quite line up, right? They're having fun. You may be focused on, well, are they learning, right? And of course, we want to have program space that is totally different from the school day. But we also want to provide opportunities for our students to grow. So I think I see a little bias here on what is relevant for this particular programming. What do you think?
No, I absolutely echo that, Shanika. You see that bias in the place of we say that 21st CCLC programs are supposed to support academic skills in our students, right? That's one of the key things that we're measuring in the GEPRAs. And yet what we hear from the project director is that they don't want to push them too hard in after school. And those things kind of have that lack of sync in what's relevant to the program. I think one of the other things that I see is a gap between maybe what they believe they're doing and their actual actions, right? They believe they're doing high quality STEM programming. And they're talking about, the program directors talking about how much their students were learning as a result. And yet, there's that gap there. And we actually saw that one come in the chat, right? There's that gap between beliefs and actions, that maybe there are STEM activities occurring, but that high quality STEM learning may not be happening, especially with that hope or vision around not pushing too hard. I think another one, you could probably go down the list, right? But there may be some unawareness on the program director's side around the impact of not pushing them too hard and the trying to promote learning through STEM and just how what they're doing in the program is impacting them. And they also not even realize things like the students love coming to the program. Like they don't have to be concerned about challenging the students in their learning so much because they like what they're doing. And when students like what they're doing, they're going to stay connected. So that's an important part of it. Shanika, other thoughts or ideas?
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to leave this activity just putting a question out there. as we reflect during this reflection process, right? We're viewing these different scenarios from our perspective. I think it's really important for us to think about, how does this look different between staff or between your subgrantees, right? There's always different pieces to what is actually occurring. We also have to paint a picture of what is happening in program space and how we can reflect on all of these different pieces of information that will eventually lead to some kind of change or a program improvement. So we'll go ahead and we'll move forward from this activity because again, we would like to get to the juicy stuff, right? We know about how we can initiate reflection. We also know about how important reflection is for our learning purposes, how we can prepare to learn from what we're observing so that we can reflect and process these things. Let's talk about those techniques. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Hillary.
So I'm going to read a couple of segments today from the book Teaching That Changes Lives as we kind of dive into the bulk of this session today. As we begin the segment that I'm going to read first, the narrator in the story is wrestling with the idea of leaving education and goes to see her mentor. And her mentor was also her third grade teacher. And so we begin by hearing the mentor, whose name is Sophie, speak as we begin this episode. So I have a little bit of this book for you. It comes down to this. When you walk into the classroom, your own mindset makes all the difference in the world. It affects how you connect or don't connect with each child, and in turn, how they connect with you. That connection, of course, will influence what your students are able to take in. It affects what they feel is expected of them and how encouraged or discouraged they'll be about learning to use their own minds and thinking for themselves. Your mindset creates the climate, the weather in the classroom. The term mindset represents the set of beliefs and assumptions we hold about ourselves, others, and the world. The weather, I asked? I don't understand. I read something many years ago that struck a chord with me, says Sophie. I recited it to my students so many times that I've learned it by heart. The author was Ham Ganat, a teacher and child psychologist. He said, I've come to a frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It's my personal approach that creates the climate. It's my daily mood that makes the weather in all situations. It is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a person is humanized or dehumanized. Are you kidding? It's my mood that makes the weather in the classroom? That's pretty daunting, I said. Yes, it can be, Sophie said, but you'll discover it's also empowering. Another educator, Robert J. Marzano, makes the same point in a different way. The relationship between the inner world of a teacher's thoughts and emotions and the outer world of a teacher's behavior has been recognized for years. In research on teacher expectations, teacher beliefs about collective efficacy, and teacher and students' perceptions of self-efficacy. That makes sense, I said. But what can we do about it? It seems like our mindsets are constantly changing depending on so many things, both inside and outside us. Sophie pointed at the choice map. Look at that figure standing at the crossroads on the left between the learner and judger paths. What are the words you see circling around its head? Anything that impacts us at any moment, thoughts, feelings, circumstances, I read. Are you saying that these create the weather? Exactly, Sophie said. And therein lies the challenge. We can't control what happens to us, but we do have a choice about what we do next. The choice map provides a way of managing how we respond to circumstances and even our own thoughts and feelings. It shows a way to monitor and change our thoughts, feelings, and actions from moment to moment. Sophie touched the wireless keyboard in her lap, and a cursor popped up on a figure standing at the junction between the two paths. in response to the weather, people will take one of those two paths, learner or judge. Those paths represent our mindsets. And to tell the truth, when we're upset or things don't go our way, our natural reaction is to head right down the judger path. You see, that's everyone's default position. We're all recovering judgers. We're all recovering judgers. Back in 6th grade, I said, you helped me become aware of the thoughts and feelings I was holding in my mind. I guess these were creating my weather, my inner weather. Most of the time, I was a big storm inside. I never thought about it. I just took it for granted that what I believed about myself was, well, just the way it was for everyone. I certainly never imagined I had any power to change. So, Shanika, as we think about that story, we're going to start with our first of the 3 tactics we're going to cover today. And really, that first tactic is the ABCC tactic. And it's the tactic, or one of the tactics, that Dr. Marilee Adams shares in this book. You see, to be able to reflect, we have to stop our current line of questioning and do what they call hijacking it, right? Replace it with new questions. And so in Dr. Marilee Adams' book, you heard the narrator begin to explore and recall this idea. We hear the narrator say, "Are you kidding? It's my mood that makes the weather in the classroom." That's pretty daunting. The mindset that what happened inside the classroom was entirely out of the teacher's control was hijacked, and a question was posed. But what can we do about it? And this helps change the narrative or the direction of the narrative for this conversation. Think about another example. Someone comes to complain to you. You spend 20 minutes listening to them, put down everyone they work with. Maybe you begin to think negatively about those people too. Or maybe you start to feel fed up with the person talking to you. You're tense, you're upset, highly emotional, right? Some of those feelings that we're talking about. This is what we call our judger mode, right? It's where that we need to hijack our question to promote our communication. And so the first question that we can ask to help ourselves in this is the A of ABCC, and that's aware. And it's just asking ourselves the question, am I in judger mode? Right? I had a staff member, and Shanika alluded to this story earlier. She knew I was going to tell it. I had a staff member who worked for me. She was a site coordinator, and she would come in with this little notebook, and she would carry this notebook everywhere with her. It was always in her back pocket. But when she came in with that notebook in her hands, I knew why she was coming in my door. You see, she was coming in my door to report, and I certainly felt like she was coming to tattle on other staff that were part of the program. I would just assume that it was going to be a waste of my time, that it was a tattle, that it was going to be emotional and not a real problem. And it really took me building some awareness within myself that when she came in with that little notebook in hand, that I almost immediately wrote off the situation. You see, I was almost always in judger mode when that notebook was out. So aware is the first of the ABCCs. B is breathe, right? It's that pause for yourself. It's the take a deep breath. It's the choice between the judger path, right, and the other path to say, do I need to look at the situation more effectively, right? It's where we pause. It's where we step back from the situation that are driving your feelings. So in Teaching That Changes Lives, the narrator is able to step off the judger path and hears from experts. her own mentor, Marzano Ganat. She says, "Are you kidding? It's my mood that makes the weather in the classroom." And it really creates that space for her to look at something more effective, right? With that staff member, I needed to give attention to what the issue was and how I could build that staff members, that site coordinator's skills to address it themselves, right? Because the reality was that every time she came in and I wrote off that little issue with the book, if I didn't make a choice that it was around building her skills to deal with that situation, it was increasing work for me that I should not have been doing, right? It wasn't building the skills like Shanika was talking about earlier. And so what I needed to do next was be curious. And that's where the next piece comes. So curiosity is the first of the C's. And curiosity asks, do I have all of the facts? What's happening here? Do I have enough information to make a judgment? And so in Teaching That Changes Lives, the narrator goes on to say, but what can we do about it? It seems like our mindsets are constantly changing depending on so many things, both inside and outside of us. And is essentially asking, what are the facts? What's in my control and what's not? Because we know what comes into our classroom. Some of it's in our control and some of it's not. But acknowledging the facts around some of it is in our control was important in this case, right? And so with this staff member, as I continue my story about her, I learned to start with what happened and tell me more questions. And that may seem obvious, but what we had to wrestle through together was help her differentiate between the things that the staff member thought that she knew and things that were actually facts. And this was really a big challenge for her. And it was a conversation that we had on an ongoing basis. And so from there, it was time to move to the last C. It's the choose, right? And the choose is, what is my choice? It's where we decide how we're going to act, right? Because we can reflect, and many times we do reflect, and then we don't make a choice to change anything as a result of our reflection. And you see, the key to effective reflection is change is action. And so we can't just have one C of the ABCs, but we have two, and that's choice. And so in Teaching That Changes Lives, the narrator does not make a choice in this moment, but if you were to continue to read the book, and it's really a very interesting book, I personally would recommend it. But continues through the story to wrestle with her frame and makes choices to stay in the field of education and stay even a classroom teacher. With this staff member that I've been talking to you about, once we identified what those facts were, once we got curious, then we could make a choice. And I had a couple of choices that I leaned into. One, could address the issue myself. This allowed me to make sure that staff, families, and students were not a whim to sometimes the emotionalism that that staff member would bring to those situations. Two, sometimes I would coach that staff member so that they could address the issue, that they could take the responsibility, that they could really lean into that work of what needs to happen. And then number three is sometimes I would explain to her why we weren't going to take any action. And here's what I mean by this. I'll give you an example of something very specific that happened. For example, once the staff member didn't feel that an employee's hair met dress code, but it did. And so we reviewed the code and we moved forward from that. In that case, taking no action was the choice, and it was the appropriate choice. But it's important to recognize that it is an important choice to move forward, to think about how you're going to act in that process. So, tactic one, ABCC, aware, breathe, curiosity, and choice. But that's not really where our unlocking of reflection ends. And so I'll pass it over to Shanika to continue talking about it.
Wow, thank you again for that reading. And I definitely look forward to hearing more, which we will as we move throughout each one of these tactics. And hopefully by now you are all kind of making those connections to what you are currently experiencing or anticipating within your own program. So far we talked about how we give feedback using that first tactic. Now that doesn't that doesn't stop there, of course, right? Now it's really important that we also think about our ability to receive feedback, which is equally important, especially if we think about improving our personal improvement and our organizational performance, right? So what we'll do right now is we are going to think about a time when a staff member or a subgrantee or someone from your team gave you negative feedback, right? How did that make you feel? Now, think about a word or a phrase that kind of expresses how you felt. And what you are going to do is you are going to head to the top of your screen where you see Shanika sharing her screen, and you are going to click that annotate tool, and you are going to choose that text box and go ahead, annotate on the screen a word or a phrase that expresses how you felt when you received that negative feedback. So far I see a couple of responses. Some of you feel discouraged or challenged. Some of you are sharing that you felt angry. Some of you are feeling emotions around defeat, right? Sometimes we feel defeated when we hear that negative feedback, right? Now, as I see a little bit more responses show up, I want you all to just take a step back and just think about how you are feeling right now in this moment, right? Because our emotions can often impact how we respond and utilize that feedback. So if we are angry or frustrated, or we felt challenged, right? What are the odds of us actually using that feedback for improvement, right? Now, we may have to definitely improve our skills around how we give our own feedback, because we're also thinking about how others may feel when we give feedback, right? And hopefully we're providing constructive feedback, but sometimes that constructive feedback can be viewed as negative, right? It depends on our own experiences and what we're bringing to the table here, right? Now, as we move forward, I do want you to think about how you currently approach feedback. And then you're also thinking about what we learned from today. Will that impact your feelings towards feedback? Right. So again, we're going to take a step back, not take a step back, we're going to take a step forward, um, focus on how we can go ahead and receive feedback. So thank you all for sharing. Oh, it's clear. Thank you all for sharing. What we're going to do is we're going to move forward, right? So in terms of receiving feedback, we do have 6 steps that you can keep in mind so that you can improve how you use that feedback, right? Start there. Feedback is definitely useful. And again, we're just going to take our emotions and we're just going to jot it and just keep it on the side right there, right? And hopefully we'll check back in and see how you feel about everything. So the first step to receiving feedback is something that we always encourage with our youth, right? Listen, right? Listen to what they have to say. Now, this may be obvious for us, especially if we're trying to instill this in our youth, use your active listening, right? I hear you say, and so on and so forth. But sometimes it's something that doesn't come natural to us, right? So what can we do to listen to others, right? That just takes us some time to just stop what we're doing and just actually listen, right? Or actively listening. We are not waiting for our turn to respond. That's something that always well, for the most part, it may happen if that's what you're used to. That may be your natural way to receiving feedback. But we are taking the time to listen to what is being shared with us. And again, we are not waiting for our turn to respond, right? We want to understand and process what is being said. And so that takes us to the next step, right? Which is consider the source, right? So we are listening to this feedback. But we would also like to support how we respond to this feedback by also considering where this feedback is coming from, right? This feedback that's coming from this individual or group, is it from something that they've observed themselves, right? Um, is it something that they know or have expertise in, right? The feedback that they're providing us, are you listening for the information that's present in that feedback, right? Do you notice that they have all of the pieces of information to provide feedback, or maybe they're missing a few things, right? Again, sometimes it's feedback and what the information that we collect, we get little pieces of it, and oftentimes we rely heavily on our own experience and our own emotions, and we kind of leave out those additional pieces that'll help us paint a better picture of this feedback that we need to process. The next step is ask for specific examples, right? Now, this is very important, especially if you feel blindsided by what occurred, or just caught completely off guard, right? That it's very helpful to ask for details about what happened, right? This will also, again, provide us additional information so that we can paint a better picture of how we should process this feedback and respond. And that actually brings us to the next step, right? Our fourth step is evaluate that feedback, right? So let's consider that we have all of our pieces of information. Once we have all those pieces, we have examples, we kind of have an understanding of where this information is coming from, the source. Now we need to evaluate what we know, right? Now, with feedback, we also need to consider what pieces are useful, because we are using this feedback to improve either ourselves or how programs can be implemented, right? So sometimes, we may be quick to ignore feedback because maybe we feel as though that person has never been in front of students. They've always been in a particular role where they aren't student facing, right? Or maybe you believe this source is unreliable because maybe their experience doesn't really match up to yours, or maybe you both have different experiences in different realms of education, right? Now, no matter what it is, it's definitely important for you to just process the information, and decide what is useful, and you'll know what is useful if you are able to improve, right? This feedback is really focused on how we perform. And that's something that we really have to keep in mind, right? It's all focused on performance and not so much about how we feel in that moment, right? Which brings us to that last step, right? Let go of negative feelings, right? Because others may not be skilled at providing effective feedback, right? We all probably aren't experts in providing feedback. That's something that it's a skill that we need to work on. I mean, we can constantly improve on that as well. Now, you may be tempted to hold on to those emotions, right? This person made you feel angry or discouraged, and you're like, you know what? I'm not going to listen to you because what do you know about running programming, right? What do you know about overseeing a number of sites or overseeing the entire state, right? So it's really important that we kind of put our negative feelings to the side and really use this feedback to help us focus on, again, the performance, right? Instead of how we feel in that moment, our emotions, right? We got to let go of those negative feelings so that we can move on from here. Now, this is something I've experienced a number of times, especially as a lead teacher. I'm often giving feedback to students, and I give feedback to associate teachers and things like that. But sometimes when I receive it, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you don't know this student, or you don't know what it's like to work with this individual on a daily basis. Like, who are you to tell me how to implement my particular programming, right? There's a lot of things that you just have to be mindful of, and just take a step back just so that you can see the overarching picture here, right? We really want to make sure that we are, again, using this feedback to inform how we perform. Right, and that brings us to our next tactic, right? So this is a simple way to think about how we practice reflection. So tactic 2, I want us all to focus on those 4 R's, right? Again, this is a very simple tactic that you can use, and you can also share this tactic with others. But that first R, represents reaction, right? So this is how you feel about what has been said. So you'll ask yourself, how do I feel about it? Now, again, these 4 R's are more of reflective questions that you can ask yourself as you process information during your reflection. So the next R is relevance, right? This is how you evaluate the meaningfulness of this to your work, right? So you're asking yourself, how is this meaningful to my work, right? How can this impact my work tomorrow or in the days to come or next year, right? And you're also thinking about responsibility, right? So this is considering what changes you should make in order to improve your program, right? Your responsibility to respond to this feedback, because again, it should be focused on performance, right? So you're asking yourself, how will I use this in my work? And then our last R is results, right? This clearly explains what will happen now, right? What will the change be? What must be changed? What must be removed, right? So you're asking yourself about the results if this feedback is to be implemented, right? So what we'll do next is practice those 4 Rs. Now, what we'll do is you'll have a link to a Padlet, and the Padlet looks like this. Now, on this Padlet, we have 3 pieces of feedback for you to implement those 4 Rs, right? So just take a look at each of these pieces of feedback, and I want you to think about your reaction, right? The relevance to your work, your responsibility, right? How will you use this in your work? And the results, right? What will change if you implement this feedback? Now, again, there are 3 different types of feedback. These are examples. If one resonates the most with you, feel free to provide as many details as possible in how you are reflecting using those 4 Rs. But you all have a link to this Padlet. Hillary just dropped it in the chat, so go ahead and open it up. And what we'll do now is we are going to give you some time to review each of those scenarios and add your response to the 4 Rs. We'll give you about 5 minutes. We'll listen to some soothing music. And then once the time is up, we'll go ahead and just take a look at a few of those responses. All right, sounds good? All right, so let me go ahead and put some soothing music on for you all. Again, you're reviewing those scenarios and adding your response to the 4 Rs. All right, let's see what we have in store for us. All right, let's take a look at this first scenario, new tracking platform. I know a lot of states are probably using new systems, right? I know a couple of my summer programs are definitely learning the ropes of a couple of new systems that are in place. So this is a big one. All right. So in the scenario, it says you mandated the use of a new digital platform for activity reporting and student tracking. Some project directors, site coordinators, and staff are excited about the potential for improved efficiency and data management, while others are resistant, citing a lack of training and the steep learning curve as major concerns. Right, that's typically what happens with a lot of new platforms or new technology, right? All right, so starting with the first R, which is reaction, right? How do you feel about it? Now, thanks, Hillary, you shared. Frustrated. I have offered 2 trainings and office hours to support sub-grantees. Now, you let us know if this resonates with you.
Nobody on this call is going to implement a new digital platform and not offer some training. I know this crew better than that.
Right. And now, oftentimes we offer this multiple times, especially if we aren't seeing any improvements, right? So that's definitely a valid reaction, right? Now, the next R is relevance. How is this meaningful to my work? Now, if you are an SEA, right, that data piece is really important because that informs us about the performance of our programs, right? Sometimes when we collect data on student attendance and their engagement, oftentimes that information could be biased, right? Sometimes we have programs who may provide their own insight on what they think student engagement is like, right? Or maybe they have their own interpretation of the attendance, right? Maybe they come back to it and then say, well, we had about 40 people, right? That happens all the time when it comes to not all programs, but it happens quite often with a number of our programs, right? Let's see what else is listed here. Oh, I'm so sorry, Brittany, I missed this one. Another reaction is change is hard. Absolutely. Implementing changes is hard. Being on the receiving end of this change is also hard, especially if they feel like they weren't a part of the decision to make that change. I knew that was a huge issue, especially around the time during COVID, right? There were tons of changes being implemented. And honestly, a lot of it was out of our control, right? Okay, so back to relevance. So Brittany shared, I see the potential for this platform to really help with record keeping and reporting. It could make things very efficient. Yes, right? We really want to make sure that we are reporting accurate information from all of our program sites. So it's really important that they use it. Let's see. Also, Hillary shared, I know that with any change, there will be early adopters and late adopters. How can I energize the early adopters and help the late adopters see the benefits? That's a great question to ask, especially if you are implementing a new system, right? How can we get everyone on the same page? Sometimes that's difficult to do right away. And sometimes we have to understand like that takes time to do well. Responsibility. How will I use this in my work? Right? Brittany shared the increased efficiency will help subgrantees spend more time on what matters most and help them collect the necessary data for reporting purposes. It will help me manage all of the subgrantee data more effectively, right? This is also important when it comes to what kinds of trainings we can provide our subgrantees with, right? If there's an issue with student recruitment or retention based on the data, we have something to kind of look to, right? What group of students are struggling with attending programming on a consistent basis? Hillary shared, I need to schedule more training options as well as some office hours. We could also offer individualized coaching. Absolutely. And I'm just going to squeeze this in here. Sometimes we do not have the capacity to support additional trainings or provide office hours or provide coaching for our subgrantees. That's where NTech comes in, right? we can help you fill in those gaps. So definitely dream big when it comes to brainstorming these solutions to these issues, because you're definitely not the first program to experience this, right? All right, and we're moving into the last R for this scenario, which is results, right? What will change? Hillary shared the goal is that everyone can see the benefits and that over time, this helps improve practice across the state. And this is something that we want to see. We want to see change, positive change within all of our programs. Awesome, that was great. Hillary, do you think we have time to review the next scenario?
I think we should do one more. Yes.
Awesome. Now, let's see. This one is focused on balancing academic support and enrichment activities. We have some responses. Okay, so the scenario is a program's local evaluator recommended increasing academic tutoring to improve test scores, but the program director and site coordinators argue that this will reduce time for valuable enrichment activities like sports and arts, which they believe are crucial for holistic development. Definitely resonated with my experience, right? So again, with that first R, reaction, how do I feel about it? So someone shared, I understand the concerns, but we have to focus on the goals and missions of the program. Yes, right? That is what is guiding a lot of our work, right? What are our goals? Sometimes we have our SMART goals, right? How are we going to achieve these goals, right? How are we staying true to the mission? Someone else shared, I sympathize with the need for the arts as well as the need for reading and math, right? Sometimes when we prioritize academic work, the arts kind of get just covered, right? Gets pushed down on our list of priorities. And that's what makes a lot of learning meaningful for a lot of students. We can tie in those arts, right? From my experience, music was definitely something that kept me coming to school early in the morning and staying until the very end of the day, just connected with my teachers all through music. Someone else shared, this is a problem that we hear frequently, always pushing for academics and less of the fun things. Right. So again, we're thinking about, what we said, what we said would be the goal of a lot of our 21st CCLC programs, right? We're supporting student growth. It's definitely not supposed to look like the school day, but we definitely want to support academics while making everything fun, right? Those are all valid reactions. Now, relevance, right? To my work, someone shared, making sure that all reviewed in a fun way, which is possible, right, is the key to the programs and my success. Absolutely, right? Now, with the flexibility of a lot of our programs, we can make learning fun. Sometimes students or youth, they just don't realize that they're actually learning, right? So we can do that in a lot of different ways. Someone else shared, every subject is valuable, yes, and there can be many ways in which we connect academics into all activities, which is proven to only further support and increase academic understanding. We're also going to motivate students to keep coming back to the program, right? If students are having fun, they want to stay there. And they're also going to recruit their friends, right? You're not part of this program? Join me. See what we're doing tomorrow. You gotta get involved, right? A lot is happening there. So yeah, so a lot of great points here in terms of like how it's meaningful to your work. Now, our next R is responsibility, right? How will I use this in my work? Someone shared, I will try to research ways to infuse the arts into learning, reading, and math skills. Absolutely. And then there was an addition to that comment, and then training staff, right? This is definitely a part of our work as SCAs, right? We want to make sure everyone's prepared to support all of those areas because they are valuable in our students' growth, as our youth's growth, but also just as learners of the future, right? Once they graduate, they are going out into the world as adult learners, right? And then again, like there's many different ways that we can infuse arts into our learning realms, right? Into our reading and math. And I'm pretty sure we definitely have a toolkit focused on how we can do that in a fun and holistic way, right? Right, Hillary? And then the last R is results, right? What will change? Someone shared, we will live in harmony and learn things in a fun way, hopefully, right? We hope, right? Now, if everyone is on board and can kind of understand how they can be a part of this change, that can be possible, right? It's all about how we reflect from this experience and support the growth of ourselves as leaders and, of course, the growth of our sub-grantees, right? What I'll do is let's return back to our PowerPoint. And yes, Hillary just shared a one of our tools, a learning recovery toolkit that kind of address these same issues here, right? Definitely take advantage of that. All right, so that actually brings us to our next tactic. But before we do, that was a quick and easy way to practice those 4 Rs, right? We can practice together in this moment, but this tactic can also be taught to your staff or your sub-grantees. It's definitely useful in terms of how they can uh, develop on their personal level, or also it just improve program performance. So again, that's just a quick tactic that you can use to help receive that kind of feedback. All right, now it's time for tactic 3. I'm going to hand it over to Hillary.
So tactic 3 is a very simple way to think about inquiry-based learning, right? And so it uses this model called the IREC model that encompasses inquire, research and reflect, evaluate, and construct. Another acronym. We've got all the acronyms today. I hope you've got the ABCCs and the 4 Rs and the IREC. Anyway, that said, each aspect of this model builds on the previous in order to foster this kind of deep, self-directed learning and critical thinking. And so the I is inquire. And inquire involves asking questions, discussing them, and reformulating them as necessary. And it starts with a curiosity and a desire to understand a particular topic or problem. This stage encourages learners to generate questions that are meaningful to them, that'll drive their engagement and their interest in the process. And so program leaders might begin by asking broad questions like, what factors influence student learning? And they might refine these questions into more specific inquiries, such as how do enrichment activities contribute to literacy skills, just connecting back to that last example. The second piece is research and reflect, right? Research and reflect entails identifying resources, accessing new and prior knowledge, and then reflecting on the information that's been gathered. This stage requires learners to locate credible sources, gather relevant information, and think critically about what they find. And really, as leaders of 21st CCLC programs in your state, there's some ownership and responsibility for this research and reflection. It helps connect new knowledge to what programs already know and consider the implications thereof. And so as we investigate the causes of student learning, sub-grantees might gather data from school day teachers, administrators, school day counselors, and more, while you might look at best practices within programs across your state. Then evaluate. Evaluate involves assessing the quality and relevance of the resources and information that's collected. You know, anybody can go online and Google anything, but we need to be intentional about making sure that we have high quality resources that we're looking at. And so learners, all of us who are in learning places, right, we determine whether the information adequately addresses concerns, questions, whether it raises new questions. And this critical evaluation is really important to help discern the validity and reliability of those sources. So sub-grantees might evaluate the credibility of different sources on student learning, questioning the methodology or strategies they're using, ensuring that their conclusions are based around sound evidence. But they may need your support in doing that. They may not know how to do that. That may not be a routine they're built into their regular practice. And then the final C, the C is construct. Construct is the stage where learners synthesize their findings and reformulate their understanding. And really here, they develop that new knowledge, new solutions. This involves creating a coherent narrative or argument based on the evaluated evidence that they might construct through a workshop or presentation that, for example, explains how to increase literacy skills through art enrichment activities, or that gives space to propose potential solutions. You see, all of us need to make space for that kind of reflection and learning in order to be able to apply that. We need to make that time for construction because most of us can't come out of a training and have something that's immediately ready to apply without a little bit of space to think about how it fits within the context of our program, of our own space. And that's why we've done things even in the session today where we've thought about how do we reflect? How do we engage in some of these things? What's happening as we think differently about things? And so these stages in the IREC model and in this third tactic are designed to progressively develop inquiry skills, started with what's essentially guided learning and then gradually moving towards more independent, self-directed investigation. And so we're going to go back to our book that we've been reading a small excerpt from today. And I want you to listen and see this happening in teaching that changes lives. And so here we're going to skip several chapters ahead and hear a little bit more from our narrator today, who has been wrestling with the behaviors and the way a specific student in her classroom engages. So this section begins with a quote: "Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while, or the light won't come in." And that's by Isaac Asimov. And the chapter begins like this: "With things going so much better for me at school, I looked forward to getting to the classroom every morning, even on Mondays. But I worried about Becky. I couldn't understand why I still wasn't reaching her, even with all I'd been learning. What was I doing wrong? Why couldn't I get through to her? I decided to write my problems with Becky in the journal Sophie, remember Sophie's the mentor, had given me. But as I opened it up, I found myself getting tense and feeling resistant. Did I have some judger lurking around, I wondered? What was my body trying to signal to me? Maybe I could use a reflection exercise to help me figure it out. I wrote down the first questions that popped into my mind. What am I missing? What makes Becky get mad and withdraw every time I try to talk to her? Am I just no good at reaching underachievers? What's wrong with me that I can't figure this out? What would Sophie do with Becky?" Then I got an idea that seemed a little nutty. Maybe I could use this journal writing to have an imaginary conversation with Becky. I'd tell her what was really on my mind and ask her questions I never could if we were talking for real. This is what I wrote: "My conversation with Becky. Me to Becky. What is it about you? You can be so exasperating. I'm sure you're far more thoughtful and intelligent than comes across in your schoolwork. Why can't you just take a little more care? Don't you recognize your own potential? Why do you push me away when I try to point out your gifts to you? Goodness knows, you're not disruptive in class, like others I could mention. Becky, the vanishing girl. You're sure good at disappearing. I'll give you that. I just don't get it. You act like I'm attacking you for just noticing that you exist. That's when I really go judger back at you. Maybe I'm just not cut out to be a teacher. Becky, you make me feel so inept, and I hate feeling inept. Becky, you make me mad. Don't tell me that stuff about potential, whatever that is. Teachers think they're so smart saying that to kids. I can't do or be potential. Everybody's always saying, I don't live up to my potential. Sure, good. That's just more bad news. Another way to say, I'm failing, that I'm not good enough for you. How can I do something I'm not? Something that's, well, not even there? You don't know what I care about. You don't know what I can do. So stop bugging me about doing something that's as invisible to me as, I don't know, turning into an ET or Nemo or some terrible monster. Plus, I don't even believe in stupid monsters like that. You talk to me like I don't matter unless I become exactly what you expect. I just feel so. I stopped writing right there. I had almost written, I just feel so inept. I mean, really? Again? This was the same statement I'd written about myself. I went back to writing in my journal. Me to myself. Who am I talking about here? Becky or myself? I realized she's a lot like I was when I was her age. Maybe she was feeling like I did when I wrote that question for Sophie's question box. Why am I always such a failure? Didn't the adults around me know that I would if I could? How can you know what you don't know or do what you don't yet know how to do? From Sophie, I learned the power of starting with what I could do instead of feeling bad or going judger on myself for what I couldn't do. Sophie helped me shift my focus to what was right and worthy about me instead of only what might be wrong or lacking. What are my assumptions about Becky and about what happens between us? What assumptions am I making? Suddenly, I noticed the clock. I'd gotten so immersed in my journal writing that I'd lost track of time. I'd be late for school if I didn't scoot. So I rushed out the door and jumped into my car, munching on a granola bar as I raced across. So, Shanika, you see in that narrative the inquiry and really some reconstruction, the reformulating, the synthesizing of what the narrator of the story has learned in the previous chapters, where there's been some research and reflection, where there's been some evaluation of some of the resources that Sophie has offered. And so it's a perfect opportunity to see this applied as we continue through this. And so one of the things that I want to mention is that as we support learning through our own reflective practice, and as we support the learning of subgrantees and the others that we lead, it's important to create some space for this. And we can do this a couple of ways. Number one is using theory and research to determine action. And that may seem obvious, but it's so important that we remain grounded in that space. Second is we can also use real life examples. It's why we benefit from hearing what other leaders are doing and observing others' programs, right? We talked about in the last session around observations, and those observations where we look for glows, we look for those programs that are flourishing. And then finally, we can reconstruct our assumptions, identifying others' preferences and differences in understanding. And so for some of you, that's why you're here, right? You're here to build a network, to have other people, SEAs that you can call on. You're joining a community of practice to have conversation. And so we encourage all of the SEAs on this call to join the office hours for that reason, because unlike the subgrantee office hours, these are theme sessions that really create a space for conversation. And so if you have a topic that you'd like to see covered in one of the upcoming SEA office hours, we'd love to have you drop it in the chat right now. Because those are the places where we have those conversations among the SEAs and you get to talk to one another. That said, we need to make sure that we take some time and create some space for some reflection today, because after we've spent all this time on reflection, it would be silly of us, silly is not the right word, but it would be unwise of us to say, make sure you make space for this, schedule the time, take your make efforts around this if we didn't create some space for this. And so as we think about this today, as we think about reflection, as we think about those places where we've had high emotions, I'd encourage you to pick a tactic, right? You don't have to use all three of them. Pick one that resounds with you and use it. Feel free if there's something that you're thinking about, that you're spinning about, that you want to share in the chat box, you can. But make some space for this, right? We want to be intentional to take that time and create space for that. And so don't walk away from our time today without spending some time on that. And as you do this for yourself, and as you continue to support staff and subgrantees, there are some strategies that we just want to put in front of you, especially as you're supporting this in your staff and in subgrantees. Number one is you need to build the relationships, right? Relationships are essential to supporting reflection in others. You have to have this mutual understanding of what you both want and what's best for youth, what's best for families, and that you're really aimed towards the same goals. Number two is ask the guiding questions. As you embark on a journey towards more reflective practices, you may need to ask yourself and those you support in reflection some of those guiding questions. Over time, that reflection will begin to occur more automatically, but in the beginning, you may need to ask some of those questions, right? Whether it's the 4 Rs, whether it's the IREC questions, just offer them. Number three is offer professional development. As you begin to promote reflection questions like what are the facts or what are my choices or even how will I use this in my work, you may find that your staff require professional development to be able to answer those questions. And then the last one is discuss the strategies during technical assistance, right? Using these strategies during technical assistance can help create more meaningful outcomes from your effort. Now, if you want to know more about how to support reflection in staff and not just unlock it for yourself, we want to see you at the summer symposium. Because Shanika is going to talk to you about all of the sessions we're offering, but I'm going to just take my moment since we're taking our moment today for pitching to Shanika. And we are having a session called Engaging Staff and Reflective Conversations, and it really will help workshop strategies that you can use to help facilitate those conversations with your staff, with your subgrantees, with everyone who needs to build their reflection in order to support quality program improvement, because that's the purpose of all this reflection. It's not just soft woo-woo for the sake of woo-woo, but it's about improving the outcomes for programs. So, Shanika, do you want to talk about the rest of the sessions?
Sure. And I just want to remind everyone, Summer Symposium is like what, two weeks away, right? And then at this Summer Symposium, you'll have access to not just other programs across the nation, but you'll have access to professionals and experts ready to support you in building a bridge for you to overcome these different challenges. So in addition to the session that Hillary mentioned, we have a ton of sessions that are being led by a number of our members on the NTAC team. So for example, the introduction to professional inquiry, building a culture of inquiry. This is focused on how we can support a culture around continuous learning. You'll also be able to learn a little bit more about different research-based models for coaching and providing technical assistance for your subgrantees. Now, all of our sessions are pretty interactive, whether it's interactive discussions or practical activities. There's definitely a lot you can gain from participating in at least one of our sessions. We also have a panel discussion around the ITAP process for a lot of our SEAs. Now, if you aren't familiar with ITAP, it stands for Individualized Technical Assistance Plan, and this is a process that Hillary and myself, along with our other senior TA liaisons, that we use to identify any priority areas for states. We use data to inform different needs for your state and your subgrantees. And then we plan a range of supports that we can provide for your state, of course, all free. So this is an ongoing living process that we like to involve all of our states. So in this panel discussion, you're going to hear from a number of states who were also involved in the ITAP. We also have reignite strategies for reengaging disengaged youth. This is an area that we see a lot of programs are seeing as a challenge, right? So we actually have a session that kind of go over a number of ways or strategies that you can implement in your program to support this. Well, time is running up. Accelerating learning recovery through high quality activities. That's another one. So if you're focused on learning recovery or meeting those academic and SEL needs, that workshop is definitely for you. We also have engaging staff and reflective conversations, right? We're also that piece is really important. I think that was something that Hillary touched on, right? We're thinking about other reflective techniques and practices. You could see it again there. We also have a session called balance beam, vault, uneven bars, or floor exercises. What events should we focus on now, and how can we get the best overall score? Now that is being led by one of our partners who are a part of our NTAC team from APT, and they are focusing on how they can explore different program needs and building long-lasting results, right? So though that's just a quick snapshot of the sessions that the NTAC team have to offer you. Hillary dropped in the chat box our feedback form, so please take a moment or two to fill out that feedback form so that it can inform us on our future SEA TAs so that we can, of course, make it a meaningful experience for you. And of course, we highly encourage everyone to stay informed. So if you haven't already, please visit the NTAC site, www.21stcclcntech.org. You can also send us an email if you have any questions at info@21stcclcntech.org. Take some time. If you haven't already done so, sign up for our newsletter. You can scan the QR code at the top, or you can go ahead and follow us on social media, right? We have accounts for X and LinkedIn. We are often sharing some upcoming events and just sharing some thoughts about what's trending and what's hot topic, right? So definitely take some time to stay informed through those many ways. And again, if you haven't already done so, please fill out our feedback form. And here's another exciting thing about our website. So you already have access to our website right now. That is actually our first phase of the website launch. Now, we have a second phase coming up that will include a full release of the website that will also include the LMS, right? So we are actually launching this at the Summer Symposium. So hopefully we will see you in 2 weeks in San Francisco, the very end of July into August, and we will love to engage with you, right? If you see anyone from our team, definitely say hi. Let's have a conversation. How can we support you and provide you more free resources so that you can support the performance of not just yourself as a leader, but your programs? And that's pretty much it. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Don't forget to fill out that feedback form. And we'll just, sit tight. Just know that tomorrow we also have SEA office hours. That's another opportunity for us to engage with one another and with other SEAs. So it's been a pleasure facilitating this session with you. And thank you everyone for joining us.